We are back with another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast. And you know that name explains everything. We're going to teach you how to do it right with our advice, because if we did it wrong the first time, so don't do what we did the first time. Each week I bring on different very smart people, so founders or authors, investors, product experts, acquisition experts, just people who are very smart and can teach us how to build a business the right way the first time. And then together, we answer the questions that you send through about what's going on in your lives and in your businesses. So if you have questions or if there are fires you're trying to put out in your business, send us an email and we'll workshop it on an episode in the future. Send those emails through to podcast@joeldtrapani.com. Now that name is a mouthful, so I'm just going to keep that in the show notes. I'm your host, Joel Trapani, and I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Vigo, which is an edtech scale-up that we've grown through Australia and the UK. And now we're focused on the US, which is why I moved to Austin, and you can probably hear a bit of an accent coming on. I'm moving slowly away from Australia and more towards a Texas accent. But on top of that, I'm also an advisor and a coach in the product space where I help startups and businesses work out how to run great product teams, because that's how you build great products. And I absolutely got that wrong the first time. And then today is an absolutely just insane guest, and I can't believe that he came on, but I'm so excited. Today, we're joined by Touraj Parang, who is the best-selling author of Exit Path, How to Win the Startup Endgame. Touraj is currently the president and COO of Serve Robotics, but is a veteran Silicon Valley deal maker. He's a seasoned entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and M&A expert who sat in every seat around the table, structuring and negotiating strategic transactions since the late 1990s. Touraj has been a founder, executive, and trusted advisor to several fast-growing technology startups, with exits to LinkedIn, Instacart, Vistaprint, Postmates, and Amplitude, among a bunch of others. In the startup world, talking about an exit is generally extremely taboo, but Touraj normalizes this topic and actually helps founders create meaningful outcomes for themselves and everyone in the business. When I first read Touraj's book, I was shocked, like, how can anyone write about this? You're not allowed to talk about this. But it was so nice to actually talk about, such a big part of the business side of things. Touraj is an absolute expert at building businesses and at selling them as well. So look, mate, thank you so much for coming on today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joel. And thanks for that very kind introduction and for reading my book and reaching out. Thank you.
Look, instead of me kind of butchering it, can you tell us a little bit more about Exit Path? Tell us about the book and the process.
Yeah, absolutely. True to the name of your show, I had a failure story of my own, which was my first startup. Back in the mid-2000s, I started this company called Jackster, which was a mobile social network. It was before we had apps on phones, in fact, before iPhone even existed. And my mission was to kind of connect the dumb feature phone to your social networking platform of choice, at the time being Friendster, MySpace, those guys. And, it grew virally. People loved what we were doing. And VCs did as well. We had our pick of some of the top VCs on Sand Hill Road. And for a while, things were going really well. They were going so well, in fact, that we almost had our blinders on and focused exclusively on just execution and building our viral engines and trying to figure out how to grow faster and faster. And we kind of lost sight of one key strategic point. And that came to haunt us when we hit the 2008-2009 downturn. I know your listeners have never experienced a downturn, but things get really bad and there's no funding to be had. And, we couldn't raise any more money despite our successes. So we had to do a fire sale. With less than a year of cash left in our bank, we had to figure out a soft landing, so to speak. And by the time we kind of got our act together, we had only 6 months of cash left in the bank. And we were then sweating bullets because acquirers were not even returning our calls, because these were cold calls to folks who had never talked to us before. So making a long story short, 4 years of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of dreams kind of all went down the drain when we had to do a fire sale, pennies on the dollar, to the only acquirer that was at the table. So took 6 months, reflected on that experience, and tried not to do the same mistake in my next startup. And the mistake being, we never courted and built relationships with acquirers until we absolutely had to. And that was our mistake. We actually made a deliberate, intentional decision not to talk to business partners, strategic partners, and just focus our own organic growth. And that came to haunt us. So in my next startup, we did things very differently. In fact, the first thing I did was take the management team to a strategic offsite, and we spent 2 days brainstorming, thinking about what would success look like for us, who would be natural allies, who is in the ecosystem that could be a potential acquirer. And that we came up with a prioritized list and started building relationships with those guys. And fast forward in 2 years, we took the company from someone that no one had heard about to actually a company that was heavily sought after by multiple strategic acquirers, public and private. Name of the company was webs.com, and we ultimately sold to Vistaprint for close to $120 million on less than $10 million in revenue. And that was a great outcome. And so I had it always in the back of my mind that this was a really interesting learning experience, a juxtaposition of these two. And then I started investing and mentoring other entrepreneurs and saw kind of the same pattern repeat itself, that those who built those relationships tended to be more successful. And then I joined an acquirer. I actually joined GoDaddy before we went public, and led corporate development for a number of our business units at GoDaddy. And then saw what things our entrepreneurs who were talking to us did right, what things they were doing wrong. And one common theme was the acquisitions that we did do successfully. We've had a long-standing relationship, at least a year, with those counterparts. So I figured I've been on multiple sides of this table. I've also been a lawyer. I've been a VC. I've seen this kind of M&A process from various different angles. So I bring a very unique perspective. And so kind of wrote the book that I wish I had when I did my first startup, so others can avoid the mistakes I made.
Yeah. It's a great book, and it kind of like flips a lot of, preconceived ideas completely upside down. So I before reading it, I was like, we can't speak to competitors. We could never speak to a VC about an exit. And it's just everything that you mentioned in the book. It's just the complete opposite, and ends up creating so many better potential outcomes. It doesn't mean you're giving up. It doesn't mean that you're going to sell your business immediately. But what it does do is by creating a potential pathway to different exits, is that it gives you options when something does go wrong, or if something goes, really well. All those different potentials and different paths are always there in front of you.
Absolutely, you got it perfectly. And it really also comes down to, what do we mean by success as entrepreneurs, right? To me, success is executing on your mission, the original idea that gave rise to your startup. And we all know that most startups go out of business, so that's not success. And those that do end up surviving in some shape or form, they're either acquired or they do an IPO. And what I realized through the course of writing this book, when I did some research, was that acquisitions tend to be so much more common than IPOs. So for every IPO, there are 30 acquisitions each year or more. Wow. And so if you as an entrepreneur are not like thinking about your strategic exit to an acquirer, you're really not seriously taking that success path and optimizing for success.
Yeah. And look, it's 2023. It's no 2008 or 2009, but the private markets are weird right now. So read this book and give yourself options. Well, look, let's jump into these questions. I've tried to pick questions that are all kind of like related-ish to this space. Now, that means that I've never done this, so we're going to be leaning really heavily on you, Touraj, to kind of guide us through this. So look, question number one is called, how do I propose M&A to a competitor? Our company has decided that merging with another company will be the best move for our startup. How should I go about describing the opportunity without sounding desperate? I've got the contact of the CEO at a competitor to propose potential M&A with our company. What kind of information should I mention in the first meetup? Should I mention the proprietary technologies that we have? Should I be selling from the first meetup, or first find out whether M&A is something that we consider? What are the do's and don'ts? Thank you so much. This is from Sandwich Pigeon 11. That's got to be one of our best names so far. I love that name.
That's wonderful. What a great question, though, and I think there's a lot to unpack in that question. So let me take it one at a time. One is just, this is not necessarily just for your competitors, for anyone that you're approaching with regards to potential M&A. What I advise is that you focus on building a relationship with that counterpart first before you get into this transactional mindset and trying to kind of do a tick for tat or try to be too cute about making a deal happen. Try to understand who the counterpart is. Try to help them understand who you are, what you're about, what are your dreams and aspirations, what is their mission, and understand how they work. Have they done other deals in the space? Why or why not? What are their strategic priorities? So this is one of the advantages actually to giving yourself plenty of time and starting this process long before you have to sell, because it takes time, right? It takes time to find who the right person is, what's their corporation's organizational structure. A lot of times the business development or corporate development folks tend to be the first people you approach, but you shouldn't stop there, because those are more deal facilitators, not deal approvers. They don't have resources. They don't have the final authority on getting a deal across the table, because when you buy a company as an acquirer, you have to integrate that company into your platform. You have to have resources that were working on something and now they have to reprioritize, shift their focus. And corp dev, biz dev teams cannot do that. So you need a business sponsor. Anyway, you need to basically have a deal champion who has the authority, influence, drive, experience to make a deal happen. So these are a lot of the preparation and the initial steps you take with an acquirer before you even start breaching the subject of a transaction. Now, if you have time, the best way to kind of escalate the relationship to its next level is to talk about exploring a potential partnership. Hey, look, maybe there is a co-marketing angle to what you guys are doing. Maybe there is a technology licensing or cross licensing. You license something from them, you give them something. It could be distribution partnership. I mean, it could take all sorts of different forms. But hey, exploring those is the next natural step before you even get to a merger. And then I talk about this at length in the book. When the timing is right, when you feel the timing is right for you and the timing is right for them, then you start approaching the subject of, hey, maybe it makes sense for the two companies to be combined. And there are ways that you can actually bring urgency and kind of bring the process to a head. One of the best times I advise, and I have used this myself, to actually make a transaction happen is when you are about to raise money. You have your investor pitch deck, you have all, you set your house in order a little bit for the fundraising. And that's a great time to also be exploring. And acquirers understand that. They know if someone is interested in buying you and they know you're about to be raising more money, they know that makes you less actionable and more expensive. So they might as well step in right now. And I have done that as an acquirer several times. Whenever I found out that my counterparts were starting to fundraise, I started prioritizing that in my queue. So these are some generic advice that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it or not do it with your competitors. You have to, of course, with a competitive dynamic, you have to customize it a little bit. It depends on the nature of competition. It depends on the relative size of the two companies. Are you the more dominant one? Are they the more dominant one? So, and in all things, it's better to be kind of taking the initial first steps, reveal some things, but not everything. And through the process of selling your startup, you kind of have these gates. One is, of course, getting a letter of intent or a term sheet from an acquirer. At that point, you can reveal more. You can let them more, kind of give them more of an under the hood picture. But you don't have to reveal everything, with the understanding that once they actually put an offer on the table and they sign a deal with you, then they can do their diligence and they would have an option to basically walk away if the things that you told them turned out not to be true on their diligence. So there's a kind of a progressive discovery approach to this. Again, I go through it in much more detail in the book, but you take things one step at a time and you escalate. As you build your confidence and your trust in them and vice versa, you start discussing more. One thing I completely advise against is to enter a relationship with suspicion and a lot of like, I don't trust you guys. Let's sign all these things before I can talk to you about anything. Well, you might as well not have that conversation to begin with, because it's all about relationship, these deals. And that's just as you would with any other relationship in your life. You don't enter it with a sense of suspicion and not trusting the counterparty. You have to kind of take a leap of faith a little bit, but of course cover yourself at the same time.
Yeah. I think, we hear that advice just so much, and I think it's important across every element of business, is that relationships need to be at the core of what you're doing. In the people you manage, and the people you potentially sell to, and the investors that you're trying to court, and the customers, it's all a relationship game at the end of the day, and it's even more important here than some of these other places, because selling a contract is that's a big deal, but selling a business, that's a big check. There's a lot of processes there. I would say that the book does go through a lot of detail about every stage, and there are a lot of stages, and there's a lot to understand. So I think, if you're in this position where you're thinking about proposing M&A, is that just stop, take a step back, and understand what that process has got to look like. Because if you just go into it and you have a call and you're just like, buy us, there's just so many phases after this that I think, you're potentially just going to put your foot in your mouth. So I think, final judgment, if I was to summarize, it's take a step back, read the book and understand what M&A looks like is really important. And the second thing is just start building relationships. So, how you propose it is go and have a beer with them, and just have a beer with them, go and build a friendship here. As we've, gotten closer with our competitors over the past 6 or 12 months, is that if they're a competitor, they probably care about the same things you care about. They built a business that does a similar thing. So it's pretty easy to build that relationship too. So just start building those relationships, and then over time, piece by piece, step through that journey. But it's not a day one kind of thing. Absolutely.
And usually markets are big enough that can support multiple competitors, and you could have competition, right? You could collaborate on some things and compete on other things. Big companies do that. Small companies should be able to as well. Another thing I wanted to mention, as you were kind of summarizing things, I have this quote in the book. I believe it's from Sam Altman that says, people do deals, not companies. Actually, I think it's from Ben Kosnoka. People do deals, not companies, and that's so important to understand. It has a valuation and negotiation has so much to do with psychology and not spreadsheets, right? So you want to build that trust, you want to build a relationship, and as you also said, acquisitions are some of the toughest processes that any company goes through. I believe it was also in the book, the CEO of Walmart mentioned that acquisitions are the biggest heartburn for him. So even if you're of that scale, you still really worry about $1 billion acquisition, even if your company is worth multiples of that. So just have empathy for your counterparts. This is a tough decision that they have to make, and make it easier for them to get there.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll close that one out. I think there's been a lot of great advice there for Sandwich Pigeon 11, but you've been advised. Start slow, start with a relationship, and read the book and understand the process. But we'll move on to the second question today. This one is called "How to Balance Acquisition and Business as Usual." My startup recently received an acquisition offer from a large player in our space. We are interested, we've agreed on a price, and have turned it into a term sheet. The deal has great momentum so far. Having said that, every advisor I've spoken with has warned me that most M&A deals don't happen, and I should try to maintain business as usual while working through the deal. Acquisition aside, the business is considering a pivot, well, sort of a pivot. We are switching from selling our solution to the end user to licensing our API to other players in our space to build their own white-labeled version of our technology. This is a big shift for us in product and sales and will require a focused effort. I'm struggling to figure out how to manage both of these major events for our company simultaneously. Our team is very small, less than 10, so as CEO, I'm still very hands-on with a lot of things. Even just from a purely mental bandwidth, I'm having trouble keeping up. We already have several interested parties in our licensing API, ready to sign deals, but haven't signed deals yet. But that idea hasn't been discussed with the acquirer, and I'd rather not muddy the waters. Should I stall those deals or stall the acquisition? Because both have a different set of priorities. I don't know what to tell them. Any advice on how to navigate this? From Juju0010.
All right, Juju0010. This is an amazing dilemma to find yourself in. First of all, congratulations for having an inbound interest from an acquirer that's willing to put apparently money where their mouth is. They seem to have gone through certain steps with you that has resulted in a term sheet. Of course, most acquirers don't do that just lightheartedly. There's a lot of steps they have to go through to get to that stage. So congrats, that's awesome. When I heard this, one red flag went up in my mind, which was, doesn't sound like this company has been in talks with other potential acquirers. It kind of sounds like they have this opportunistic thing come inbound, and then they sort of then went through and tried to see what it is, and then they kind of landed on a set of terms. But how do they know those are the best terms they could get in the market, right? And it doesn't really sound like they have gone to others to kind of do a market check and do a gut check and understand, well, is this the best they can do? Ultimately, pursuing a sale is one of the many options you have. Other options would be selling to somebody else. Alternatively, continuing the course if you need money, raising money. If you don't need money, doubling down on your execution. So you have to kind of take that in the whole entire context of it. And yes, acquisitions can be very time consuming, distracting, and if they don't happen, demoralizing for everybody involved. There are many stories of folks who go through the process and end up with nothing, and in fact end up losing the company because of all the dust that gets kicked up in the M&A process. So part of your diligence on the acquirer should be understanding how serious are they, how real is their conviction that they want to go through with the deal, how far up the chain has this gone, has this received, for instance, board approval, executive approval, like who is really pushing for this, and so become more and more comfortable that this is a likely thing to happen, then it's a Hail Mary pass on their part. And so yes, this dilemma is a very real one. If you had perhaps had the benefit of time, you would, when you receive an inbound interest, you would have all these other relationships with other potential acquirers and that you could quickly activate and get a sense for, hey, if I'm going down the acquisition path, is this the best that I could do? But if this is your dream acquirer, this is the ideal place your company could land, then it becomes a matter of pricing and timing. Is this the right time? Sounds like you have some licensing deals in the hopper. Well, perhaps if you close on those deals, you'd be a more valuable company. I don't know why you would want to hide the ball. Typically, anyone who's selling tries to bring every piece of news, especially good news, to the table because that makes them more valuable and makes the acquirer more interested. And it's fine to say, look, things have changed. Our price has changed because of that. I actually was in that situation at GoDaddy once, where we signed a term sheet with a potential seller, and just because of some macroeconomic things, this company just ended up doing extremely well. In the process that we were doing our due diligence and preparing kind of the final definitive agreements, they just started doing so well that they came to us and said, look, we're not interested in selling anymore because the business is doing so well. Everything has changed for us now. And what we said was, okay, wait a second. We know you're doing well. What is the new price? And so we had to offer a lot more than we initially were offering because of those changes in circumstances. The reverse happens also. If you enter into a conversation with an acquirer and your business end up not doing as well after you've signed a term sheet, the acquirer can either walk away or demand a reduction in price. And that happens a lot too. So a lot can, as you go through the process, a lot can change. Again, the best advice is to keep in close contact with your counterparts, learn as much as you can about them, and be transparent because everything comes out in diligence.
Yeah, I think, hiding good news seems the most silly thing here. Like, if you got great things happening, you would tell investors, and these people are effectively investing in your business. They're just investing a whole lot more for a whole lot more. I guess, for me, this question doesn't feel like balancing acquisition with business as usual, though. This feels like balancing acquisition with a pivot. And kind of the red flag that jumps out for me is that this person is kind of downplaying the effort to pivot from a consumer business to effectively a B2B or an enterprise business. And they are two very different businesses to run. And the transition is going to be really painful. So I doubt, I've not sold a business, and I've not sold a business during a pivot, but I know that going through that pivot ourselves took a very long time and a lot of effort, and we fucked up a lot of stuff in that process. So I don't think you can do a pivot while you're going through an acquisition. I think, if you're getting effectively free contracts that you can just service, that's great. Or if you can keep building interest there that, leads to potential interest and more, future value for the acquirer, that's great. But I think, if I was in that position, I would work out if we wanted to charge ahead at the acquisition path, or if we wanted to push that back and go down that pivot path, because they do seem like two big forms of effort, and they need a lot of focus. And it sounds like maybe like they feel like they can kind of do both because this person came to them. But what you said, Touraj, is like they shouldn't be having just one person consider the acquisition, because like in an investment round, you want competitive tension. More and more and more people drive up the price, and the likelihood that someone will sign quickly. There is great momentum, and that is great, and maybe this happens. But I would be hesitant to think that you could do both of those things at once.
I tend to agree. And also, yes, you're spot on. Also, in terms of negotiation leverage, if you don't have viable alternatives to this acquisition, then you really have lost all your leverage. If you can't just easily walk away from a deal, and it would be a catastrophic failure on your part, as it was with my first startup, then you really have no leverage. And they can dictate their price. They can change their price anytime through the process, and you would have no recourse. So, but yeah, be very careful. I agree that doing something that requires a lot of executive attention, like a pivot, and going through an M&A process is very hard. There are companies that may be able to pull it off, but that means that you have a leadership layer that can bifurcate, and some people can really focus on that, and some people can dedicate their time to the M&A without much kind of collision between them, and that's rare. So without knowing a lot more about how you're set up as a company, it's hard to say, but my guess is that it will be kind of setting yourself up for failure on both sides if you try to pursue them at the same time.
Yeah. I would say what you can do is work out which path is more interesting to you and keep that as your 80-90% focus. And then you can keep the other thing alive with 10% of your effort. So if you don't really want to sell, just keep having the conversations, keep going, let them drive the deal. And if it comes off and it gets to a point where you can sign a document and you get that money, great. But the chances are if you're only putting 10% of the effort in, it won't happen. And the same goes with the pivot. If you're more interested in the sale, go hard on the sale and put all the effort you need to get an acquisition done. And keep the pivot idea kind of moving along. Build the infrastructure that you need and keep talking to customers and do it so it doesn't impact the main goal you have. Because it's like when you do an investment round, you can't do everything at once. An investment round takes up all of your time. So spend all of your time where it needs to be to get that one thing done, and keep the ideas and the vision of these other ideas alive, but with minimal effort.
And there's an alternative also, maybe worth thinking about, which is, sounds like you have two businesses here. One is the kind of the consumer business, the other one is kind of more the B2B business, and perhaps what's happening is that you're selling the consumer business, but you want to continue on the B2B business. So it's more like a bifurcation or an asset sale. So that could be a path you could also pursue with some acquirers, depending on their appetite. They say, hey, look, I'm going to sell you my consumer business, but I'm going to keep the B2B business. And you can have even a stake in that, or you could invest in that. This gets a lot more complicated, but with the right acquirers, they may be actually very much into that and supportive of it.
All right, we'll bring this one to a close. We'll give it a final judgment. The final judgment is, number one, work out what you want to do. And then number two, run whatever that one is with a good process, with the vast majority of your effort. And if it is the acquisition path, run that process as a proper process. Understand it, read Touraj's book, read Exit Path, understand deeply how to run that, and go out to other buyers, go out to potential buyers, check the market, check your valuation, check if this is real, and start driving up that competitive tension to really increase your odds of closing. And if it's a pivot, do the pivot, go down that path. And then the last piece of advice there was just, if you can, split them, just sell the consumer part and then kind of keep that one there and do that next. Well, look, I think that's all we have time for today. So we'll close the questions out there and we'll go to the very last section, plugs. This is the audience's absolute favorite section. I don't know if that's true, but I like to say it. So hopefully we get feedback of everyone telling us how much they love plugs. But what have you got going on right now, Touraj? What would you like to plug?
Yeah, well, I published this book, we mentioned it, Exit Path. I would highly, thank you for also your endorsement. I would highly recommend that you grab your copy, or if you like to consume by kind of audio version of it, there's also audio version on wherever you get your audiobooks from. Just get familiarize yourself with the basic concept, basic ideas, the process overall. And the other thing I would also recommend, this is not a personal plug, but I can be available for that sometimes as well, is to surround yourself with folks that have gone through this process before and have business advisors, have deal advisors, have folks that can help kind of guide you through some of these things, because having been through it multiple times, both seller as on the seller side and the buyer side, can really help you, and you can kind of piggyback on some of the learnings and hard learnings of folks that have gone through that process. So I do recommend also having an advisor that you can trust, be someone that you can kind of bounce off ideas with. Now, I know lawyers a lot of times fill in that role, especially specific like deal lawyers, M&A lawyers, if you happen to have some, which is great. But based on my experience, having been a lawyer before, lawyers tend to be more risk averse. So what they are great at is protecting your downside and kind of showing you things, areas where things could go wrong and how you could protect yourself. But what you also need is someone that can maximize the upside for you. And those tend to be non-lawyers, folks who have been more in the transactional side of business for many years.
I love it. The plug is just good advice. Get an advisor. We actually give that advice out on almost every episode. So I'm glad it came up today as well. Get an advisor. Advisors are the best. Whatever you're trying to do in your business, get that freaking advisor. And then I would absolutely just echo that sentiment from you, Touraj, which is read this book and just read it early. Whether you're considering, exiting your business now, or if it's the furthest thing from your mind, think about this from the very beginning, because I think it will set you up for a whole lot better outcome. And I wish I'd read it so much earlier in my career as well. And then on my side, thank you to everyone who writes in. We love these questions. They're so fun to talk through. So if you've got challenges or questions or fires, send them through and we'll workshop them on a podcast. And then do not forget to like and subscribe. So get out your phone, go to YouTube, go to Spotify, whatever, 5 stars, subscribe, thumbs up, whatever the positive interaction is, give us that. Then pull out your friends' phones, your family's phones, and do it on theirs as well. Download all the apps, take up their storage space with our podcast. And then lastly, if you got questions, you want to chat, I love meeting new people, I love talking through this stuff. Let's have a call, let's have a conversation. I've got a booking calendar in the show notes as well. I love connecting with new people. So if you're a startup fanatic or if you've got your own product challenges, I'm obsessed with this space. Let's jump on a call. But we're going to wrap this one up. So Touraj, thank you so much for arguing with us today and laughing with us today. I love this conversation. And to the audience, this has been another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast. We will see you all next week.